All right, 19 minutes after 8. Just think back to the last time you went to the shop, how much it hurt when you had to pull out the credit card or all the money in your wallet just to buy the basics. Cost of living very high at the moment, but we have some good news, it seems. Your days of spending exorbitant amounts of money on food could be coming to an end. Well, let's bring in Nedbank's head of agriculture, John Hudson, to talk about this for us. Hello to you, John. Good to have you back on eNCA. I imagine then this has all got to do with inflation beginning to slow down. When we say good news, how good is the good news?
Morning, Gareth. Yes, it is good news, but it's probably a double-edged sword, because while we do expect food inflation to peak at around 10%, we do expect it to, I suppose, moderate in the second half of the year. But that doesn't mean to say that it's going to, the prices are going to drop. It's just that the pace of inflation is going to lessen. So that 10% peak is really stiff. It's hard to take on board for, most of us. And we do expect, though, that in the second half of the year, for it to moderate to probably average at about 7% for the year. So I suppose in some ways, some relief. And that is really on the back of some of the key drivers starting to turn. So, we're seeing fertilizer prices starting to soften. We're seeing maize prices starting to soften as well, and so I think the worst is actually really behind us, which is really good news. And the other important factor is that the country continues to produce sufficient food, and that's really has stood us in good stead through this time of crisis.
It certainly has. So if we come back down to an average of around 7%, as you say, in the second half of this year, if we were to, as consumers, would we start seeing any significant drops of the prices of agricultural goods on the shelves? Could we see a drop, for example, in bread or the price of cooking oil or flour? What do you imagine is going to be the biggest drop that consumers will be able to see when they pay for their groceries?
Well, what I do think is really important is food security, and maybe I'm just going to position it in two ways. National food security. As a country, we export about 50% by value. That is 50% of what we produce. So, from a food security point of view, we certainly have enough food. And I think, to be honest, that's why our food inflation is not as high as some other countries. Some other countries, including the likes of the EU, Brazil, and then some of our African neighbors, Zambia and Kenya and so on, their food inflation has been much higher than ours. And if you go back to 2009 in South Africa, food inflation went higher than 15%. So I think if you take it in that context, maybe 10% is not that bad. But where I want to really dwell on is household food security, because that is what does worry me. And that's your point around some of the basics in that food basket. What does that look like? And even at, you would argue, at 7%, that's quite tough to fathom when you're living on the breadline. And really that comes down to either producing that food yourself. And I do see some of that happening, to be honest. We are seeing more and more people looking to produce their own food. And then, of course, the ability to buy food, that's the other part of it. And that really talks to not only the sector and its ability to produce food, but of course, just the total South African economy, jobs, employment, and so on, But I think just to add to that, what we are seeing, which is really interesting, is township economy seems to be doing well, So you started to talk about that cost of driving to the malls or to work or whatever. And we see this trend emerging where many people are shopping locally, in your township. So either at the spaza shops, and that could be food outlets, it could be hair salons, etc. So I do sense that people are making a plan. It's not easy, even at these high food prices, but people are busy making a plan and finding ways to keep their heads above water.
Yeah, and I suppose as a last question to you, John, I realize this might be more on the economist side of a conversation like this, but it just made me think of it when you were talking about the economy, township economy, and households' affordability as well. I suppose the issue could be with a drop in food prices. The retailers have obviously taken a bit of a knock. with the jump in food prices and grocery prices, less people were buying it, but they don't have the money to buy those groceries. Now, with the cost, or with the cost of groceries coming down, many people, as you say, have now become more sustainable. We might see less feet going through shopping centres, so you could actually see retailers keeping their prices higher, but they're not selling as much because people, as you say, have made a plan elsewhere. Is that a concern?
Well, I'm not sure, how long retailers can hold prices higher, because they need to also be competitive. And in the township economy as well, those spaza shops, are going to provide that competition. So I think generally, if we see the drivers of food, and that has to do with world supply chains, it has to do with Russia, Ukraine, if that war comes to an end, and I think much of the bad news has been factored in from that war. But if it comes to an end, I think that'll be a big positive for us. I think the other thing which is going to play out is the dropping fuel price. That is good news. Oil prices have started to come off, and we expect that to continue. And I think that's going to put money back into people's pockets as well. We expect next month the fuel price could come down again, and that has a massive impact. Whether that's the man in the street or whether it's your business, that is going to ripple through, and I think that's going to also be of some benefit to us. And if you think about agriculture, we're going into our summer planting season. So springtime is when the farmers start to plant, they start to use a lot of diesel, etc. If you look at the citrus guys at the peak of their export season, so a lot of trucks going down to Durban to, push their fruit out through the harbors, etc. So I think any relief from a fuel point of view is major, and that impacts not only agriculture but the entire South African economy. So I really do think things are turning and are looking up. It's still not going to be easy, even at 7% food inflation. But some of those key staples, I think maize, wheat, sunflower oil, I do expect those to come off, which I think is good news.
Of course, it's very good news, isn't it? Looks like there might be light at the end of the tunnel. All we need is Eskom just to keep our lights on, then everything might return to normal. John Hudson, thank you very much. Indeed, that's some good news from Nedbank's head of agriculture. Possible fuel price decreases, possible food price decreases as well, but don't expect things to halve or anything like that. But we could see a drop in some of those prices. And it all had to do with what John was talking about, the oil price and the international market. So he lined this up very nicely for us, that John Hudson, 27 after 8. Here are your markets.